He poisoned his own children to protect his fortune. Before we begin this terrible story, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Paris, Lyon, or somewhere else in the world? And if you love chilling stories, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because the story of the Dufresne family will show you just how far human greed can go. Believe me, after hearing what happened in the cellars of B, you'll never look at vineyards the same way again. The autumn of 1847 painted Burgundy in shades of gold and bronze. Vineyards stretched endlessly around the commune of B, their perfect rows swaying in the wind like green and golden waves. At the top of a hill overlooking the land stood the Château Dufresne, an imposing limestone mansion with a slate roof, surrounded by manicured French gardens that had once been the pride of the entire region. Henry Dufresne stood in his office on the first floor, his thick hands resting flat on a massive oak desk. At 60 years old, the man still carried an imposing stature, his back straight despite decades of hard labor. His graying hair was neatly combed back, and his dark eyes, deeply set beneath bushy brows, scanned the papers spread before him with a disturbing intensity. The room smelled of cold tobacco and the leather of old bindings. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the dark red wallpapered walls. Outside, rain began to drum against the tall windows, heralding one of those autumn storms that often swept across the region. Mater Rousel should arrive any minute now, Henry muttered to himself, checking his gold pocket watch. 3 knocks on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Enter. A thin man in his 50s stepped into the office, carrying a worn leather briefcase. It was Mater Augustin Rousel, a notary from nearby. For 25 years, he had the gaunt face of someone who spends his days bent over dusty ledgers. He greeted Henry with a respectful nod, but his eyes betrayed a certain unease. Monsieur Dufresne, I have prepared the documents as you requested. Good, sit down. Rousel took a seat in an armchair opposite the desk and pulled several sheets from his satchel. The parchment crackled under his fingers as he laid them out carefully. I must tell you, Monsieur Dufresne, these provisions are extraordinary. Never in 25 years of practice have I drawn up a will of this nature. Henry leaned forward, his hands joined to form a triangle before his lips. My wife died 3 months ago, Mater Rousel, dead in her sleep, the doctors said, but you and I both know Adelaide's death was not natural. The notary swallowed painfully. Madame Dufresne's death had indeed provoked whispers throughout the region. Some spoke of poison, others of suffocation, but no one dared openly accuse the patriarch. Henry Dufresne was too powerful, too influential. My children, Henry continued in an icy voice, think they will inherit my fortune when I die. They wait, like vultures, for me to join Adelaide in the grave, but I will not give them that satisfaction. Monsieur, your children, began Rousel, his voice trembling as Henry cut him off. They are traitors, Henry snapped, his voice suddenly rising. They conspired against me. They poisoned their own mother to speed up their inheritance. They think I do not know, but I have eyes everywhere in this house. Rousel felt a chill run down his spine. The Frane's 5 children were well known in the district. Edouard, the eldest at 35, already managed part of the vineyards. Marguerite, 32, married to a wine merchant from Dijon. Louis, 32, studying law in Paris. Céleste, 29, still single and living at the Château. And the youngest, Theodora, 25, passionate about viniculture. Then here is my will, declared Henry, rising and walking to the window where the rain now ran in sheets. My fortune, the vineyards, the chateau, the lands, the investments, everything will go to the last of my children still alive. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the pounding rain. To the last one, Rousel stammered. Exactly. You realize what that means. You will pit them against one another. Henry turned. Suddenly Henry turned, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. That is exactly my intention. Let them reap what they have sown. Let them devour each other, just as they devoured their mother. Rousel rose to his feet, his legs trembling. I can't, this is madness. You're condemning your own children. You will write this will, Mater Rousel, Henry said coldly, stepping dangerously close to the notary. Otherwise, certain documents concerning your own financial indiscretions might find their way into the wrong hands. The notary turned pale. Of course Henry Dufresne knew. He always knew. This man had eyes and ears everywhere. He knew every secret in the region. With shaking hands, Rousel picked up his pen again. When, he asked faintly, when will take effect? As soon as I die, Henry replied, his tone eerily calm. And that will happen very soon. My heart is weakening, perhaps a month, perhaps a week. But when I go, this document will be read before my 5 children. And then, the true inheritance I leave them will begin. That night in the many rooms of Chateau Dufresne, none of the 5 Dufresne children found peace in their sleep. Something had shifted in the air, a heavy, suffocating tension that seeped under doors and through the thick stone walls. In his chamber, Edouard, the eldest, stood by the window, staring out at the vineyards drowned in darkness. He felt his father was plotting something, something terrible. Marguerite, in her room on the 2nd floor, clutched a letter from her husband. She had only returned to the chateau for her mother's funeral, and she planned to leave for Dijon at dawn. Louis, recently back from Paris, sat in the library smoking one cigarette after another, restless and uneasy. He had noticed the strange gleam in his father's eyes, the silent menace behind his every look. Céleste knelt in her room before a crucifix, praying fervently. She had always been the most pious, the gentlest of them all, but even she could sense that something dreadful was stirring in the house. And Theodora, the youngest, wandered through the wine cellars with a lantern in hand, seeking comfort in the familiar scent of aging oak barrels and fermenting grapes. None of them yet knew that their father had just sealed their fate, that soon blood would flow as freely as the wine in the cellars of Frayne. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, as if even the heavens knew that a terrible tragedy was about to unfold. 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning, Henry Dufresne was found dead in his office. His body was slumped in his armchair, an oddly peaceful expression frozen on his face. Dr. Fontaine of Beaune declared it heart failure, exactly as Henry had predicted. The funeral was grand, attended by nearly everyone in Beaune, who had come to pay their respects to one of Burgundy's most prosperous winemakers. The 5 Dufresne children stood side by side near the freshly dug family crypt, dressed in black, their faces solemn and unreadable. Edouard, tall and broad-shouldered, wore an expression of carefully controlled gravity. His brown hair was just beginning to gray at the temples, giving him the air of a patriarch in waiting. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, eyes fixed on the coffin as it was slowly lowered into the earth. Marguerite wept quietly beneath her black veil. Despite their strained relationship, Henry was still the man who had raised her. She leaned lightly on her husband, Pierre, a gentle man who seemed deeply uncomfortable amid the heavy solemnity of the occasion. Louis stood stiffly, chin raised, jaw clenched. His relationship with his father had always been combative, but he respected the man's authority. In Paris, he had learned the art of masking emotions, of wearing the polished mask of bourgeois propriety. Celeste sobbed openly, her handkerchief pressed against her face. She had always believed she was her father's favorite, at least. That's what she wanted to believe. Her black dress accentuated her frail figure, her chestnut hair pulled tightly into a severe bun. Theodora, the youngest, had red-rimmed but dry eyes. He watched his brothers and sisters more than he watched the grave. Something in their demeanor unsettled him. He could feel the tension between them, the years of resentment, the unspoken words that hung like ghosts between each breath. After the ceremony, they all gathered in the Shadehouse grand salon for the reading of the will. Mater Rousel sat behind a temporary desk set up for the occasion, papers spread out before him. His hands trembled visibly as he poured himself a glass of water. "My condolences to you all," he began in a shaky voice. "Your father was a remarkable man." "Spare us the formalities, Mater Rousel," interrupted Edouard, settling into a large armchair. "Read the will." The others took their seats around the salon. The room was magnificent, carved wooden panels, rich tapestries, and towering portraits of Dufresne ancestors staring down from the walls. But on that day, the air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rousel unfolded the document and began to read. With slow, deliberate movements, as if he were handling a bomb, Mater Rousel began to read. "This is the last will and testament of Henry Dufresne, written on the 23rd of October, 1847, in the presence of myself, Augustin Rousel, notary." He cleared his throat, his eyes scanning quickly over the text he already knew by heart. "I, Henry Dufresne, sound of mind though weakened in body, hereby declare this to be my final will regarding the disposition of my earthly possessions." The 5 children listened intently, each mentally calculating what portion of the inheritance they might receive. "I have observed my children for many years. I have seen their greed, their jealousy, their eagerness to see me gone. I have seen how they conspired, how they hastened the death of their mother in hopes of accelerating their enrichment." "What?" cried Marguerite, suddenly standing up. "That's a lie." "Let him finish," ordered Louis, his face paling. Rousel continued, his voice growing weaker with every word. "Therefore, I have decided not to divide my fortune. The Château Dufresne, the vineyards, the lands, and all my investments and holdings, with a total estimated value of approximately 800,000 francs, shall pass entirely and exclusively to the last of my children still alive." The silence that followed was so heavy that one could hear the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the corner of the room. "To the last one," whispered Celeste, her eyes widening in confusion. "The survivor," Rousel repeated, "shall inherit everything. Nothing shall be divided until 4 of my children are dead. This is my will, and it shall be executed according to the laws of France." Edouard shot to his feet, nearly knocking over his chair. "This is madness. He can't do that." "I'm afraid he can," replied Rousel, removing his spectacles and rubbing his eyes. "The will is perfectly legal. I verified it with 2 other notaries. Your father was of sound mind when he signed it." "But that means," Edouard began, then stopped as realization struck him. "It means," finished Louis coldly, that the old man has pitted us against each other. He's condemned us. Marguerite slowly sat down again, her face as pale as her handkerchief. He truly believed we killed Mother. Apparently, replied Edouard, walking toward the window, and now he's punishing us for it. But we didn't do anything, protested Celeste. Mother died of what exactly? Louis cut her off sharply. The doctor was never sure. He said sudden death, but father always had his doubts. Another heavy silence fell. The siblings exchanged uneasy glances, a new and dangerous suspicion flickering in their eyes. "What are we going to do?" asked Theodora at last. "We contest this will," Edouard declared firmly. "It's madness. No sensible judge will uphold this." "3 judges have already validated it," Roussel intervened. "Your father was very thorough. He had this document authenticated by the highest authorities in Dijon. So we all live here together until we die of old age," Marguerite demanded, hysteria in her voice. "Is that the plan?" "The will also stipulates," Roussel continued, consulting the papers, "that the Chateau and the vineyards must continue to be worked. The profits will be divided fairly among all the children who are still alive, but the properties themselves will only pass to the last survivor." "We're trapped here," Celeste murmured, "prisoner of our own inheritance." "I refuse," Marguerite said, rising. "Pierre and I are returning to Dijon. I want nothing to do with this cursed fortune." "You can't renounce your share," Edouard objected. "Legally, you are one of the heirs." "Then I will live apart from my husband and our business. We'll manage." She moved toward the door, but Louis grabbed her arm. "Think, Marguerite. 800,000 francs, it's an enormous fortune, enough to live like kings for the rest of our days at the price of our brothers and sisters' lives." "No thanks." She freed herself and left the room, her husband close behind. The 4 remaining siblings stayed silent, each lost in thought. The clock continued its steady ticking, counting the seconds that passed in this new reality. "We must stay united," Theodora finally said. "That's what father wanted, to divide us. Let's not give him that satisfaction, even in death." "A noble sentiment," Louis replied with a bitter smile. "But how long before the temptation becomes too strong? Before one of us starts to think they might be the sole survivor?" Edouard turned, his gaze sweeping over his brothers and sister. "If anyone even thinks of harming the others, I will hunt them down myself. Will or no will, we are a family." Even as he spoke, the words rang hollow. The poison of doubt had already been sown. Henry Dufresne, even from his grave, continued to manipulate his children like pawns on a chessboard. That night each locked themselves in their rooms, and for the first time in years, bolts were drawn across the doors of Chateau Dufresne. Winter settled over Burgundy with unusual severity. Snow covered the vineyards in a white blanket that muffled every sound. The Chateau Dufresne, once a place of gatherings and laughter, had become a prison. "Contest this will," Edouard said firmly. "It's madness. No sane judge will uphold it." "3 judges have already done so," replied Roussel. "Your father was very meticulous. He had this document certified by the highest authorities in Dijon. So we just live here together until we die of old age?" asked Marguerite, her voice rising in hysteria. "That's the plan." "The will also states," Roussel continued, glancing at the papers, "that the Chateau and vineyards must continue to be operated. The profits will be divided equally among all the living children, but the properties themselves will go only to the last survivor." "We're trapped here," Celeste murmured, prisoners of our own inheritance. I refuse, Marguerite declared, standing up. Pierre and I are going back to Dijon. I want nothing to do with this cursed fortune. You can't renounce your share, Edouard objected. Legally, you're still one of the heirs. Then I'll live apart from my husband and our business. We'll manage. She headed for the door, but Louis caught her arm. Think, Marguerite. 800,000 francs, it's a colossal fortune, enough to live like royalty for the rest of our days. At the cost of my brothers and sisters' lives. No, thank you. She tore free and left the room, her husband right behind her. The four remaining siblings sat in silence, each lost in thought. The clock ticked steadily, marking the seconds of their new reality. We must stay united, Theodora finally said. That's what Father wanted to divide us. Let's not give him that satisfaction, even in death. A noble idea, Louis replied with a bitter smile. But how long before temptation becomes too strong, before one of us starts thinking they could be the last survivor? Edouard turned, his gaze sweeping over them. If anyone even thinks of harming the others, I'll hunt them down myself. Will or no will, we are a family. But even as he spoke, he knew his words were hollow. The poison of suspicion had already taken root. Henry Dufresne, even from his grave, was still manipulating his children like pawns on a chessboard. That night each of them locked their doors. For the first time in years, bolts slid shut inside the Château Dufresne. Winter fell hard on Burgundy. Snow blanketed the vineyards in a thick, suffocating silence. The Château Dufresne, once filled with laughter and celebration, had become a prison. What was she doing down here? Edouard asked. I don't know, Theodora replied, his voice breaking. I found her like this. Edouard knelt beside their sister's body, examining her carefully. He noticed a bruise on her temple. She fell. She must have slipped on the spilled wine and hit her head against the barrel. That's what you want to believe, Louis said bitterly. Or that's what we're supposed to believe. What are you implying? Edouard shot back, standing abruptly. I'm implying that none of us should be surprised. Father's will is doing exactly what he intended, destroying us. You think someone killed her? Theodora asked, horrified. I think it's a possibility, Louis replied, crossing his arms. A very real possibility. The three brothers stared at each other in the flickering light of the lamps. Whatever fragile trust remained between them had now completely shattered. We have to call the authorities, Edouard declared. And tell them what? Louis retorted. That our sister died in an accident, or that we all suspect each other of murder because of a madman's will. The local gendarme, Lieutenant Mercier, arrived the next morning. He was a man in his 50s, his face weathered from years patrolling the countryside. He examined the scene, questioned each brother separately, and finally concluded it had been a tragic accident. Mademoiselle Dufresne must have come down to the cellar during the night, he explained. Perhaps to fetch some wine. She slipped on the damp floor, struck the barrel hard enough to topple it and hit her temple. Death was likely instantaneous. That's it? Louis asked incredulously. You're not going to investigate further? Investigate what, monsieur? Mercier shrugged. It's an unfortunate accident, nothing more. But in his eyes, Theodora saw doubt. Mercier wasn't as certain as he claimed. Still, proving a murder in a family as powerful as the Dufresnes would take far more than suspicion. Celeste was buried beside their parents in the family crypt. The ceremony was brief and sparsely attended. The scandal of the will had spread throughout Beaune, and most people preferred to keep their distance from this cursed family. Marguerite came from Dijon for the funeral, accompanied by Pierre, but something about her had changed. Her face was harder, her eyes colder. "I knew this would happen," she said to her brothers after the ceremony. "Father planted the seeds of our destruction." "Do you think it was murder?" Edouard asked. Marguerite looked at her three brothers in turn. "I think we're all capable of terrible things when 800,000 francs are at stake." She left that same evening, refusing to spend another night in the shade now. The following weeks were suffocating with tension. The three remaining brothers avoided each other as much as possible. Edouard spent his days out in the vineyards, even in the biting cold. Louis locked himself away in the library, pretending to study legal documents. Theodora wandered through the cellars, haunted by the image of Celeste lying in a pool of spilled wine. Then came the night in February when Louis disappeared. It was Edouard who raised the alarm. Louis hadn't come down for breakfast, unusual for him as he was always punctual. His room was empty, his bed unmade, but there were no signs of a struggle. They searched the entire shadow from attic to cellar. The servants were questioned. No one had seen or heard anything. 3 days later, Theodora discovered the truth. He was walking through the vineyards, wrapped tightly in a heavy coat, when he noticed something strange near the old vines to the north of the property. The snow had been disturbed, as if someone had dug a hole and then filled it back in. Borrowing a shovel from the shed, he began to dig. After half an hour of effort, the shovel struck something soft fabric, then a hand. "Edouard!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Edouard!" His brother came running, and together they uncovered the body. It was Louis, frozen, his lips blue, an expression of pure terror frozen on his face. "My God!" whispered Edouard. "How?" Theodora noticed the marks around Louis's neck, deep bruises. Someone strangled him, then buried him in the vineyard. This time, Lieutenant Mercier couldn't ignore the obvious. It was murder, brutal, deliberate murder. An investigation was opened immediately. The two remaining brothers were questioned for hours. Their alibis were checked, but neither could prove where he had been the night Louis disappeared. "One of you killed your brother," Mercier said coldly, "and I will find out which one." But days turned into weeks and no evidence emerged. The mystery remained unsolved. Back at the chateau, Edouard and Theodora barely spoke. Each locked and barricaded his bedroom door every night. Sometimes in the dark silence of the halls, they heard footsteps. Was it the other or something else? Simply their imagination, tortured by fear and guilt. The curse of Henry Dufresne was indeed at work. Of 5 children, only 3 remained, and all knew that the nightmare was far from over. Spring arrived in Burgundy like a promise of renewal, but at Chateau Dufresne, only death seemed to bloom. The vineyards budded, unaware of the tragedy consuming their owners. Marguerite returned from Dijon in March, against her husband Pierre's wishes, not by choice, but by necessity. Their wine business had collapsed. A string of bad harvests and poor investments had ruined them. She had no other option but to claim her share of the Frayne estate's income. "You shouldn't go back there," Pierre had pleaded. "2 of your siblings are dead. That chateau is cursed." "We have no money, Pierre," she had replied, tears in her eyes. "Nothing left. If I don't claim my part, we'll end up on the streets." So she came back, her face marked by hardship, her once elegant clothes now worn and faded. The pride in her eyes had vanished, replaced by a visible despair. Edouard received her in the grand salon, with calculated coldness. At 40, he had grown heavier, his hair streaked with gray, but his gaze remained sharp and assessing. "So you've come back," he said, pouring 2 glasses of cognac, "after swearing you never set foot here again." "I need money," Marguerite said bluntly. "My share of the estate's profits." "Of course," Edouard replied, taking a slow sip of the amber liquid. "You know Louis is dead." "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The police came to question me in Dijon. They think one of you killed him." "They have no proof. The investigation has stalled." "Was it you?" The silence that followed was thick with meaning. Edouard set down his glass deliberately slowly. "What kind of question is that? Why would I kill my own brother?" "For the same reason one of you probably killed Celeste, for the inheritance." Edouard rose and walked toward the window overlooking the vineyards. "You know what I've realized, Marguerite? Father was right about one thing: we are all capable of greed. Even you, especially you, now that you've come back to beg." Marguerite's cheeks flushed red. "I'm not begging, I'm claiming what's legally mine." "Of course," Edouard said coolly. "And if you're wondering about Theodora, he lives in the old hunting lodge 3 kilometers away. He refuses to sleep in the shadow, says he hears voices at night, the voices of Celeste and Louis. The ones who always leave while the rest of us stay behind to rot," Edouard murmured, his knife scraping harshly against the plate. Marguerite forced a faint smile. "You could leave too, you know. Sell your share, start over somewhere else." Edouard laughed a dry, bitter sound. "And abandon this, the land father bled for, the vineyards that carry our name. No, Marguerite, this chateau is our destiny or our grave." Theodora kept his eyes on his plate, barely touching the food. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. "Enough talk of graves," he murmured. "We've buried enough Dufresnes already." An uneasy silence fell. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the crackle of the fire. After dinner, Theodora excused himself and left for the lodge, muttering something about early work in the vineyards. Marguerite went upstairs soon after, feeling a weight pressing on her chest. She tried to write a letter to Pierre, but her hand shook too much to hold the pen steady. Around midnight, the storm began, wind howling, shutters banging, the whole chateau creaking under the assault. Suddenly, a faint noise echoed from the hallway. Footsteps again. Slow, heavy, exactly like the ones from the previous night. Marguerite froze. Her candle flickered violently. The steps stopped just outside her door. Her breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" she whispered. No answer. Then a soft scrape. Something being dragged across the floor. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it would give her away. She gathered her courage and crept toward the door, pressing her ear against the wood. Nothing, just the wind. After a long, dreadful minute, she backed away and sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. Then crack. A violent noise echoed from downstairs. Something or someone had fallen. Marguerite grabbed her candle and hurried into the corridor. The flame flickered wildly, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. She descended the staircase, her bare feet silent on the cold steps. In the great hall, the front door was ajar, banging in the wind. "Edouard," she called out. No response, only the groan of the storm. She moved closer, her candlelight revealing something on the floor, muddy footprints leading toward the cellar door. Her pulse raced. She followed. The cellar door was open. A faint draft blew from below. She descended carefully, the candle trembling in her grasp. At the bottom, the air was cold and thick, with the scent of wine and mold. "Edouard," she whispered again. Then she saw it. A shape slumped against one of the old barrels. She lifted the candle higher. "Edouard." Eyes open, lifeless. A dark bruise encircled his throat. Marguerite dropped the candle, screaming, its light snuffed out as it hit the floor. Darkness swallowed the cellar whole. Only one sound remained, a single pair of footsteps retreating up the stairs. There was a sarcastic tone in his voice. "Tell me, Marguerite, do you ever think about Céleste, about Louis?" "Every day," she replied, staring at her plate. "So do I." Edouard took a sip of wine. "I just wonder who will be next." The silence that followed was unbearable. Theodora wasn't eating. He simply stared at the chandelier in the center of the table. "Stop it, Edouard," he murmured finally. "Stop what? Telling the truth," Edouard retorted coldly. "We all know more of us will die. Father's will demands it." "The will demands nothing," Marguerite shot back, anger in her voice. "It's a document, not a death sentence. We can choose not to let it destroy us." "How naive," Edouard sneered, standing up and grabbing the wine decanter. "A little more." Marguerite extended her glass, but Theodora stopped her with a sudden, sharp gesture. "No, don't drink that." Edouard burst into laughter. "See, Marguerite, even among us trust is dead. Theodora thinks I'm trying to poison you. Isn't that pathetic?" Nevertheless, he poured the wine into his own glass and drank deeply. "Satisfied now, little brother?" The dinner ended in heavy, suffocating silence. Marguerite went to bed early, drained by the constant tension. She locked her door carefully and wedged a chair under the handle, as she did every night. Sleep came only in restless fragments, haunted by nightmares where her dead brothers and sisters chased her through endless vineyards. Then came the scream, a horrible, inhuman sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marguerite jolted awake, her heart pounding wildly. She lit a candle and rushed to the window. Outside in the moonlit courtyard, she saw Edouard shouting and gesturing toward the roof. "Fire, fire!" Horrified, Marguerite saw flames licking the eastern side of the shade now. Smoke was already seeping under her door. She rushed to remove the chair and pulled at the handle, but the door wouldn't open. No, no, she pulled with all her strength, but it was stuck or locked from the outside. Panic gripped her. "Help, I'm trapped, help!" The smoke thickened, stinging her eyes and burning her lungs. She ran to the window and threw it open wide. 3 floors down, a deadly fall. Below, Edouard had vanished. Only Theodora remained, carrying buckets, desperately trying to smother the spreading flames. "Theodore," she cried, "I'm locked in." He looked up at her, his face illuminated by the dancing firelight. For a moment their eyes met, and in his she saw something terrible, hesitation or perhaps guilt. Resignation. "Theodore, help me," she cried. But he turned his gaze away and kept throwing water on the flames, too far from her window to make any difference. The smoke was unbearable now. Marguerite coughed violently, her lungs burning. She looked once more at the dizzying height below, then at the thick black smoke filling her room. She had no choice. She climbed onto the window ledge, her legs trembling uncontrollably, 3 stories high. She thought of Pierre, of their life in Dijon, of all the dreams they once shared. "Forgive me, my love," she whispered. Then she jumped. The wind screamed in her ears as she fell. A brutal impact, blinding pain, then nothing. Theodora ran over, dropping his bucket. Marguerite's body lay twisted in an impossible position, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the starry sky. Edouard emerged from the shadows of the shadow, still carrying more buckets. She jumped, Theodora said hollowly. She jumped. Poor Marguerite, murmured Edouard, without the faintest trace of emotion. She should have stayed in Dijon. The fire was contained before it consumed the entire shadow. The damage was significant, but localized. Lieutenant Mercier arrived at dawn with several gendarmes. Their investigation revealed that the fire had started in a shed near the eastern wing. Probably a tipped-over oil lamp, Mercier concluded. As for Marguerite's door, it had jammed because the heat had caused the wood to swell. Another accident, said Mercier, eyeing the two surviving brothers in turn. You seem to have many accidents in this family. It was an accident, insisted Edouard. We did everything we could to save her. Mercier said nothing, but his eyes spoke volumes. He no longer believed in accidents, but without proof. There was nothing he could do. Marguerite was buried beside Céleste and Louis. Pierre came from Dijon, broken by grief. He stood before the fresh grave, screaming accusations at the brothers. You killed her, murderers. You killed her for your cursed fortune. The gendarmes had to drag him away by force. He left that same evening, swearing to return with evidence, with witnesses, with justice. But deep down, Pierre knew he would never return. The Château Dufresne had become a house of death, and only the dead ruled there now. Only two heirs remained. And both knew the end was near. That summer was the hottest Burgundy had seen in decades. The vineyards withered beneath an unforgiving sun, and even the nights offered no relief. They brought no relief from the scorching heat. At Château Dufresne, the atmosphere was even more stifling, not because of the weather, but because of the unbearable tension between the two remaining brothers. Edouard and Theodora no longer spoke. They communicated by notes left on the salon table or by brief gestures in the vineyards. Each had established his own territory. Edouard occupied the west wing of the Château, Theodora the east. They ate at different times, slept with barricades across their doors, and only crossed paths when absolutely necessary. All the servants had left the Château. Even with generous wages, no one wanted to work in the house where 3 heirs had died within a year. Rumors in Beaune ran rife. Some spoke of ghosts, others of curses. But everyone agreed on one thing: the Dufresnes were paying for their father's sins. Lieutenant Mercier came to inspect the Château every week, hopping to catch one of the brothers in the act. But he never found anything, just 2 men living like prisoners in their own home, each terrified that the other would strike first. You know that one of you is going to die, he told them one July day after summoning them both to the great salon. This cursed will not stop until one of you is dead. Edouard, seated in an armchair by the window, shrugged. Maybe, or maybe we'll both die of old age and the estate will go to the state. You don't believe that any more than I do, Mercier shot back. I've seen the way you look at each other. You watch each other like birds of prey eyeing their quarry. Theodora, standing by the cold hearth, spoke for the first time in weeks. What do you want us to do, Lieutenant? Sit here and wait to make your job easier? I want you to understand I won't let this go. When one of you dies, and one of you will die, I will have enough evidence to hang the survivor. I promise you that. After Mercier left, the two brothers remained alone in the salon. The silence was deafening. He's right, you know, Theodora finally said. One of us will probably die. Perhaps, Edouard replied without emotion. Was it you for Céleste, Louis Marguerite? Edouard rose slowly and moved to the window. The vineyard stretched away as far as the eye could see, bathed in the golden light of evening. What does it matter now? They are dead, we are alive. Soon, one of us will join the others. Answer me, Theodora insisted, his voice rising. Tell me the truth. Did you kill our brothers and sisters? Edouard turned, an enigmatic smile on his lips. Prove it. That night Theodora did not sleep. He sat on his bed with an old shotgun across his knees, listening for the slightest sound. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind made him flinch. Around 3 in the morning he heard footsteps in the corridor, heavy, deliberate steps approaching his room. Edouard, he whispered, shouldering the gun. The steps stopped outside his door. The silence stretched on forever. Then, at last, they receded. Theodora exhaled slowly, his hands trembling on the weapon. He could not go on like this. He had to act. The next morning he left the Chateau before dawn and went to Beaune. He went straight to Maître Roussel, the notary who had drawn up the cursed will. There must be a way to break this will, he said urgently, a legal way to stop it all. Roussel, who had aged by 10 years in the last few months, shook his head sadly. I have consulted every legal expert in Dijon, even in Paris. The will is untouchable. Your father was meticulous. So I'll renounce my share, Theodora said. I'll sign a document abandoning the inheritance. You cannot. As long as you are alive, you remain an heir. That's the law. So the only way out is death, Roussel finished in a lugubrious voice, yours or that of the other. He left the office with his mind in turmoil. Walking the streets of Beaune, Theodora passed people he had known since childhood, but everyone looked away, hastening to avoid him. He had become a pariah, marked by the family curse. Back at the Chateau late that afternoon, he found Edouard in the cellars inspecting the barrels. His brother did not even look up when he entered. We must talk, Theodora said. About what? Edouard replied coldly. About ending all this, finding a solution. Edouard finally turned, his face lit by the faint glow of a lantern. There is only one solution, little brother, and we both know it. I won't kill you, not really. Even if it's your only chance of survival, even if you know I could kill you at any moment, you haven't killed me yet. Maybe I'm waiting for the right moment, or maybe— Edouard paused, a strange smile on his face. Maybe I killed no one. Maybe it really was all accidents. I don't believe you. Then shoot yourself now and end your misery. Live in fear until death takes you. Theodora stared at him for a long time, searching that familiar face for a clue, a confession, anything. But he found only his own reflection, a broken, haunted, condemned man. He went back up to his room, locked the door twice, and wept for the first time in months. Days turned into weeks. August came, then September. Harvest time approached, but without servants it was impossible to pick the grapes. The vines sagged with ripe fruit beginning to rot on the vine, a catastrophe for any winemaker. But neither Edouard nor Theodora cared anymore. Money, fortune, the estate, all of it had lost meaning. Only survival remained. It was on the night of September 23, 1848 that it all ended. A terrible storm struck Burgundy, lightning tearing the sky and thunder shaking the Chateau's foundations. Theodora lay awake in his room, unable to sleep because of the din. Around midnight he heard a strange sound from downstairs, not footsteps, but something else, a creak followed by a muffled cry. He took his gun and cautiously descended the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. The air crackled with electricity. making the hairs at the back of his neck stand on end. The ground floor, where Edouard kept to himself, was plunged in darkness. Only the lightning provided brief flashes of light. In one of those flashes, Theodora saw something near the staircase leading to the cellar. He drew closer, his lantern trembling in his hand. Edouard lay at the foot of the stairs, his head twisted at an impossible angle. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling but seeing nothing. "My God," Theodora said as he descended carefully and knelt beside his brother's body. He was dead, there was no doubt. The neck was broken cleanly. "He fell," Theodora murmured. "He slipped and fell." But on closer inspection he noticed something else. The steps were coated with an oily substance. Someone had deliberately greased the staircase, a trap. Theodora's heart began to race. If Edouard had set that trap, it meant he had planned to kill him. But the trap had turned on its maker. Or then a terrible thought crossed his mind. What if someone else was responsible, a third party who had remained hidden all this time and orchestrated all these deaths? He sprang to his feet, scanning the shadows around him. The storm raged outside, the wind howling through the ill-fastened windows. "Who's there?" he shouted. "Show yourself." Only the thunder answered. Theodora spent the rest of the night huddled in the salon, the gun. The gun pointed at every shadow, flinching at the slightest sound. When dawn finally came, gray and drenched in rain, he went to fetch Lieutenant Mercier. The investigation was conducted swiftly. Mercier examined the staircase, the body, the scene. His conclusion was clear and final. "Your brother slipped on the greased stairs, a trap he probably set for you, and into which he fell himself. Divine justice, some would say." "You really believe that?" Theodora asked, his voice hollow from exhaustion. "Honestly," Mercier replied, "I don't know what to believe anymore, but you are now the only surviving heir. The entire fortune belongs to you." He leaned closer, his piercing eyes studying Theodora. "Tell me, Monsieur Dufresne, was it really worth it?" Theodora looked around at the crumbling shadow, the rotting vineyards, the portraits of his dead siblings staring down from the walls as if to accuse him. "No," he whispered, "no it was." Edouard was buried in the family crypt, joining his parents and siblings. Theodora was the only one present at the ceremony, standing under the relentless rain. Even the priest seemed eager to finish quickly, muttering the prayers before hurrying away. Left alone in the cemetery, Theodora stared at the graves of his family. 5 people dead in less than a year, all for a fortune that now belonged solely to him. Franks, the chateau, the vineyards, everything was his. But as he looked upon those tombs, a dreadful realization struck him. He had no one left to share it with. No family, no friends, nothing but himself and a castle haunted by ghosts. Weeks passed. Theodora tried to bring the estate back to order, hearing new servants, but no one would work at Chateau Dufresne. The rumors were too strong, the reputation too cursed. Then the nights grew worse. He began hearing voices, whispers in the corridors, laughter in the cellars, weeping in empty rooms. He told himself it was just his imagination, the weight of guilt pressing on his mind. But the voices grew clearer, more insistent. "Theodora," it was Celeste's voice, soft, mournful. "Why did you let us die?" "I didn't kill you," he shouted into the darkness. "I didn't kill anyone." But the voices would not stop, accusing, tormenting, unrelenting. By October, Theodora made a decision. He could no longer live here. He would sell the estate, leave everything behind and start anew, perhaps in America, where no one had ever heard the name Dufresne. He counted several potential buyers, but as soon as they heard the story of the estate, they backed out. Shadow Dufresne had become unsellable. One November evening, sitting in the great salon with a half-empty bottle of wine before him, Theodora had a revelation. He finally understood his father's true curse. It wasn't the will itself. It wasn't the fortune that would go to the last survivor. It was something far more subtle, far more cruel. Henry Dufresne knew his children would destroy one another, not necessarily by murder, although that might happen, but by the mere presence of doubt, suspicion, and fear. By turning them against each other, he had guaranteed that none of them could ever enjoy the inheritance in peace. The survivor now himself would inherit everything, but he would also inherit the guilt, the doubt, the madness. He would spend the rest of his days haunted by the ghosts of his brothers and sisters, forever wondering if he could have saved them, if he had been complicit in their deaths. That, he realized, was the true punishment, not death but survival. Theodora burst into laughter, a hysterical sound that echoed through the empty rooms of the Shadow. He laughed until he cried, until his throat ached, until he could hardly breathe. When he finally calmed, he noticed something on his father's desk that had remained untouched since his death, a sealed envelope bearing his name. With trembling hands he opened it. His father's handwriting was steady and clear. My dear Theodora, if you are reading this letter, it means you are the last survivor. Congratulations, you have won. But have you truly won? You now possess everything for which your brothers and sisters died, but you will also carry the weight of their deaths until the day you die. You are probably wondering if you could have prevented all this. The answer is yes. You could have refused to play my game. You could have left, renounced the inheritance, and lived a modest but honest life. But you did not. None of my children did, because money, fortune, and power hold more sway over you than fraternal love. That is my true legacy. Not the money, the lesson. The man you have become is my work, and you will live with that until your death. Your father who loved you so much, Henry Dufresne. Theodora crumpled the letter and threw it into the fireplace. He watched the paper burn, his father's words disappearing in the flames, but he knew those words would remain etched in his mind forever. Months passed. The winter that followed was the coldest anyone could remember. The most disturbing thing was not his lifeless body, it was what surrounded him. All around the room, on the walls, were names written in charcoal: Celeste, Louis, Edouard, Amélie, the names of his dead brothers and sisters. Under each name a date, the exact day they had died. And beneath those, one final line, written in shaky handwriting. Now we are together again. The investigators arrived a few hours later. Lieutenant Mercier, pale and shaken, was among them. He hadn't expected what he found that day to haunt his nights for years to come. In Theodora's pocket, they discovered a folded piece of parchment, yellowed and damp with tears. It read, "The inheritance was never money. It was the curse of our father's greed. He sowed death to protect his land, and now death guards it. No one escapes the Shadow Dufresne." After Theodora's burial, the estate was abandoned. Nature reclaimed it year after year, ivy crawling up the walls, trees breaking through the stone. Locals whispered that on stormy nights, lights still flickered through the shattered windows, and the faint sound of a piano echoed from the great hall. Even today, no one dares to live there. Farmers passing by at dusk claim they sometimes hear laughter, the laughter of children, faint, distant, but filled with sorrow. The Shadow Dufresne still stands, half swallowed by the forest. A monument not to wealth, but to the curse of inheritance, a reminder that greed can destroy not only lives, but entire bloodlines. Would you have stayed like Theodora did, haunted by the ghosts of your past? Or would you have walked away, leaving everything behind, even your family's legacy? But the most chilling detail was his expression. Theodora didn't look afraid, he looked almost relieved. A faint smile rested on his pale lips, as if death had finally given him peace. On the table beneath him lay a single letter, held down by a half-empty bottle of wine. When Lieutenant Mercier arrived an hour later, he unfolded the note, and with every line he read, his face grew paler, his breath heavier. I can no longer bear their voices. Day and night they call me. Céleste, Louis, Marguerite, Edouard, even my parents. They want me to join them. They say it's the only way to find peace. Perhaps they're right. Let whoever finds this letter know this truth. The fortune of the Dufresnes is cursed. 100,000 francs, soaked in the blood of 5 innocent souls. Let no one touch that money. Let it remain buried with all of us. I ask that the Shadow be destroyed, the vineyards abandoned, and the name of Dufresne erased from memory. But I know it will not happen. Human greed is too strong. Someone will come, claim the inheritance, and the cycle will begin again. To that person I say, flee while you still can. This fortune kills. It killed my family. It killed me. Do not make the same mistake. Theodore Dufresne, last of his name. Mercier folded the letter slowly, his hands trembling. Around him, the shadow seemed to breathe, alive with something unseen, something foul. A sudden creak echoed from the upper floor. Just the wind, he whispered. But deep inside, he knew, something else lived within those walls. Something dark, something waiting. The legal battle for the Dufresne estate dragged on for months. Distant cousins, creditors, even the state, all demanded a share of the fortune. Yet none wanted the shadow itself. Too many deaths, too many whispers. Finally, in 1850, the property was auctioned off for a fraction of its worth. A wealthy industrialist from Lyon purchased it, hoping to turn it into a summer retreat. He lasted 3 nights. Terrified, he fled, claiming to have heard voices, seen shadows moving across the walls, and felt icy hands brush against him in the dark. Over the years, several owners tried to reclaim the estate. None lasted more than a few weeks. Some spoke of strange occurrences. Others, too rational to believe in ghosts, spoke only of an unbearable heaviness in the air, an oppressive silence that crushed sleep and sanity alike. The vineyards, once the pride of Burgundy, were abandoned. The vines grew wild, choking themselves, reclaiming the land. The Shadow Dufresne, the cursed heart of the Dufresne legacy, fell into ruin. Roofs collapsed, walls split, windows were bricked shut. By 1870, it was officially declared unsafe and sealed off. The villagers of Beaune avoided it entirely. They said that at night, lights still flickered behind the windows. And if you listened closely, beneath the wind, beneath the rain, you could still hear a woman singing. They say it's Céleste, still waiting for her brother. Repaid. They said that the windows of the Shadow Dufresne had long been sealed, yet on some nights, faint lights still flickered behind them. Voices were heard rising from the cellars, and on rare occasions, 6 shadowy figures could be seen wandering through the overgrown vineyards. An old man, a woman in a white dress, and 4 younger shapes following behind. The Dufresne family, together at last in death, as they had never been in life. Lieutenant Mercier retired in 1855. On his deathbed, he gave his son one final warning. Never go to the Shade au Dufresne. Don't even approach the vineyards. There are places where evil has taken root so deeply, it can never be driven out. That place is one of them. His son, a practical and rational man, laughed off his father's superstitions. But years later, during a walk near the ruins, he heard it, carried softly on the wind, a woman's voice, singing a lullaby. Gentle, sad, relentless. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He simply walked faster, his heart pounding, knowing deep down that his father had been right. Some places are cursed. Some fortunes are stained with blood. And some families bear curses that transcend death itself. Today, in 2025, the ruins of Shade au Dufresne still stand, hidden among vineyards now owned and cultivated by other families. Yet the exact spot where the mansion once rose remains abandoned, an island of desolation in the middle of prosperity. The modern winemakers who tend the surrounding lands avoid that ground at all costs. Their machines break down mysteriously when they get too close. Their workers refuse to go near it, even for double pay. On certain autumn evenings, when the fog rises from the soil and the wind whispers through the vines, the silhouette of the ruins can still be seen against the sky. Collapsed walls, hollow windows, and cellars yawning like open mouths into darkness. And if you listen carefully, truly carefully, you can hear voices carried by the breeze, whispering, calling, waiting. For the curse of Henry Dufresne was never broken. It sleeps still, patient and watchful, waiting for the next fool tempted by the secrets buried within its ruins. The next who dares believe they can defy a curse nearly 2 centuries old. The next who will learn, as the 5 children of Frayne once did, that some inheritances are not worth claiming, and that sometimes the price of blood can never truly be paid. Repaid, the stones of Shade au Dufresne still stand, silent and patient, waiting for their next victims. For a story is never truly finished. It merely waits for the next chapter, the next sacrifice, the next soul to join the 6 ghosts condemned to haunt the ruins of their greed for all eternity. And somewhere in the depths of the collapsed cellars, if anyone were foolish enough to venture there, they would still find Henry Dufresne's original will preserved in an iron box. The words are still legible, the ink barely faded by time. To the last of my children still living, a promise never broken, a curse never lifted, an inheritance that continues to claim its due generation after generation, patiently waiting in the shadows for someone foolish or greedy enough to claim it. The Frayne family disappeared nearly 2 centuries ago, but their story still resonates, a chilling warning to anyone who believes fortune is worth more than family, that gold is worth more than blood, that an inheritance is worth more than life. Burgundy's vineyards still produce some of the world's finest wines, but those grown near the ruins of Shade au Dufresne have a peculiar taste, bitter, ashy, a taste of death. And on stormy nights, when thunder rumbles and lightning tears the sky, the people of Beaune close their shutters and whisper prayers, for they know that the Frayne family never truly left their shade now, and that the cursed inheritance still waits for its next heir.